David Barsamian is a widely decorated independent journalist. He is winner of the Media Education Award, the ACLU's Upton Sinclair Award for Independent Journalism, and the Cultural Freedom Fellowship from the Lannan Foundation. He's the author of several books with the likes of Noam Chomsky, Edward Said, Richard Wolff, and others. And he is likely best known as the host of his weekly public radio program, Alternative Radio. Established in 1986, AR is a weekly one-hour public affairs program offered free to public radio stations, and it provides information, analyses, and views that are frequently ignored or distorted in other media. Welcome to the Soapbox, David.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric, and I was amused that I'm well decorated. I hope I am.
Well, okay, so I thought maybe we could just jump right into it, David, and I'd like to see if we could maybe cover sort of a broad range of issues that I think you cover on the show as well as in lectures that you deliver personally. And given the news of the day, I thought I'd start here. Here we have Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and many others, and now Walter Scott, an unarmed African-American shot in the back by Officer Michael Slager in North Charlestown, South Carolina. Now, I think many Americans would like to believe that these are unfortunate but essentially random and unrelated incidents. Are they right to view it that way, or are these incidents indicative of a broader problem that America is facing?
Well, I think the issue with, state security forces, as I call the various police departments, and racism is very serious. And thank God that we live in the era of cell phones where all of these incidents, or most of them, can be captured. For example, the choking of the gentleman Eric Garner in New York, Staten Island. That was made international, front page news because we had the footage. The same thing with the Walter Scott killing in South Carolina. There's very disturbing comments that were made by members of the Ferguson, Missouri police force, not just about the victim in that case, Michael Brown, but also Barack Obama. Overt racist statements. So there's definitely a pattern of police violence, of random killings, seemingly random, but we now have a broad dossier of incidents, and these add up to a ongoing problem of racism. Just because we pass legislation that allow African Americans to vote, or to have access to public facilities, and all of those triumphs of the mid-1960s, it doesn't mean that there's any kind of racial equality. It seems that many members, I can't put a number on it, of the police departments around the country have very jaundiced views when it comes to African Americans and other people of color, I may add.
There was an article in the Washington Post just yesterday that something to the effect of how a camera changed the story of Walter Scott and essentially led to the murder charge, which has been placed against Officer Michael Slager. Of course, it sort of disregarded the fact that there was clear, indisputable video evidence of Eric Garner being strangled to death by many police officers, and yet no indictment there. I wonder, has it come to that random chance that not only does there have to be someone there with a camera and the wherewithal to be able to record it, but also it happened in a municipality that has the sense to actually bring charges? And if justice is that unequal in America, what further problems are we facing?
Well, justice is indeed not equal in America, as the entire political system and the economic system is not equal. There's enormous gaps. There, huge amount of inequality on income and on wealth as well. And it plays out in the justice system. I mean, you know these terrible jokes about, we've got the best system money can buy. And, if you're a person of means, you can hire the best trial lawyers and, effectively get off any kind of punishment or with very light punishment. We see that particularly in high relief, Eric, with what I call crime in the suites versus crime in the streets. Crime in the suites, when you rip off hedge funds, when you steal money and offer bogus mortgages to hapless and gullible people, the law is very light on those kind of white-collar crimes, crime in the streets. Often, in the case of the bankers on Wall Street, not a single banker has been, much less convicted, has not even been charged with any malfeasance. But if you or I, pull up to a gas station and fill up our tank and drive away, it's very likely that, we'll go to jail. Or if we, order a pizza and don't pay for it, or walk out of a grocery store with a bag full of groceries without paying for it, it's likely, we're going to go to jail. So the focus consistently is on crime in the streets, and that, of course, reflects an enormous racial bias, because most of the targeted victims of crime in the streets are people of color.
Right, and that gets into issues of economics as well, right? And let's move to that.
And it works that way with for example, the tax code. Where April 15th is looming. People are going to pay taxes. You or I think I can say, do not have the high-powered lawyers and accountants that can work the tax code, that can find the loopholes and all of the tax breaks that are offered to the rich and the powerful. And, the ordinary person simply doesn't have access to that kind of power and expertise. And so there's a tremendous amount of, resentment vis-a-vis the IRS because of that.
Studies have also shown that Americans dramatically underestimate the degree to which inequality is a problem in America. And they also, there was a study that, I think it was Princeton, correct me if I'm wrong if you happen to know, but there was a study that came out that also suggested that we dramatically overestimate the degree to which we are a functioning democracy. That is to say that a study was conducted, and legislation that is passed has a direct correlation to the desires and preferences of wealthy elites, but the will of the people, the mass of the lower classes of people, has zero statistical significance on the influence of legislation. Wonder, how did we get to this point, David, and how do we? Are we so far gone that we cannot reclaim a democratic sort of ethic?
Well, first of all, I would question this whatever study you cited that Americans severely underestimate.
To be fair, that was my interpretation of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think because of the Occupy movement, I think the great success of the Occupy movement was to inject the notion of 1% versus 99%, that there's an elite 1% that dominate wealth and income. So I think that idea is now, it's gotten into the aquifer. I mean, you even hear mainstream politicians or, gas bags like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and others, talking about income inequality and why is this happening. Of course, they don't have, the right answers, but I think what's happened over the decades, particularly since the 1980s with the tremendous assault on labor unions and the ability of workers to organize themselves through very repressive legislation in many, many states, and now to bring it up to date, we're not just talking about Mississippi and Alabama. We're talking about classic union states like Wisconsin and Michigan, where right-to-work laws have been passed, a la their southern counterparts. This has had a tremendously pejorative effect on workers and wages. Wages have essentially gone flat since about 1980, and it's not by accident. Corporate profits have skyrocketed. Corporations around that time also discovered, offshoring their workforce, offshoring their production, moving it to tax-free havens, storing their money in Cayman Island banks and elsewhere, so they don't have to pay taxes. I mean, this is part of what's happened to the United States, which has increasingly become a plutocracy, where you have tremendous concentrations of wealth and then huge concentrations of inequality. And of course, people say, well, you can change that. You can just vote, go, turn out every 2 and 4 years and vote for your candidate. But who are we voting for? We have a choice there between arsenic and cyanide. Those are the choices. And you pick your poison. Well, arsenic, you can live a few more months and you'll have a lot of body pain. That might be a viable option. But, a cyanide, you'll die immediately. And, elections have become essentially hollow rituals. There's much flag waving and cheerleading by network anchors and hack columnists like David Brooks and Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, who cheerlead American democracy. There's nothing like it. The people are able to express themselves. Well, fewer and fewer people are expressing themselves. I just recorded Glenn Greenwald, who's a frequent guest on alternative radio, and he talks about how elections are now just awash in cash. It's literally going to the highest bidder, and at the same time there's this hypocrisy that we hear about. Well, it's a level playing field. You got your vote, you got my, and he's got his vote or she's got her vote, but your vote doesn't count because you're not Sheldon Adelson, you're not David Koch, you're not some gazillionaire that's flooding the political system with cash. And so this has become particularly acute. I mean, the trends have been there for decades. It's pretty hard to miss, but, we have a very disciplined intellectual class in this country, as Noam Chomsky points out over and over again, that somehow misses what's right in front of them. And so this income inequality, wage stagnation, outsourcing of jobs, particularly well-paying union manufacturing jobs, the passage of right-to-work legislation, the increasing difficulty for workers to organize themselves. This has been, again, part of a pattern, and it's bipartisan. I mean, I want to emphasize that. This is Democrats and Republicans acting pretty much in lockstep to produce these kinds of outcomes because they answer to the rich and powerful. So you can call your senator or you can write an email to your Congress representative, but it won't have the same weight as when one of these, high rollers call or write. And as I was saying, this entire problem has become exacerbated since the passage of Citizens United in 2010, and then compounded by McCutcheon versus FEC. I mean, this literally has taken all of the hinges off the proverbial doors. Cash is able to move about in secret to various candidates. Bogus committees are set up that can channel money to this or that candidate. So, Ralph Nader's also been talking about this for decades until he's hoarse, about how the political inequality has produced the income inequality as well. Richard Wolff is another voice who's excellent on these particular issues. Someone, actually, we just did a program on alternative radio about bailouts and capitalism. You know, they're bailouts for the rich. But, you know, my father had a little grocery store on East 87th Street in Manhattan when I was growing up. If, you know, he couldn't pay the rent, you know, maybe the landlord would cut him some slack for 1 month, but, you know, if it went into more than that, he'd be out on the street. There was no government bailout for, you know, the working poor, essentially. But for the rich and powerful, Uncle Sam is always there, writing the check and protecting their benefactors, political benefactors.
Ralph Nader and Richard Wolff, actually, interestingly enough, have both appeared on the Soapbox as well.
As they should.
Yeah, I'm pleased
I think
to say.
they are dissident voices that we have to put in the foreground and, you know, push some of these, you know, right-wing fundamentalist capitalists to the rear.
So about elections, David, let me ask you this. Is it as simple as getting a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren or maybe even a Jill Stein to run a compelling campaign, or will it take something larger and more transformative? Because I feel like the people that are getting exercised and excited about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, let's say, are sort of the same people that were exercised about Obama, and of course the profound disappointment that the Obama administration has been. What hope is there in the existing political structure?
Very little. As long as money is king, then the outcomes will be pretty much determined in advance. We have to remove money. We have to allow for public funding of elections. Elections have to be limited in terms of time and scope. You know, the campaign has already started. I just heard a report that Hillary Clinton, who has just opened her presidential campaign headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, is about to announce her candidacy. Rubio and Cruz and others, Rand Paul has just announced. So, you know, here we are almost a year and a half out before the November 2016 election, and the candidates are announcing themselves. It's a preposterous situation. As Jim Hightower likes to quip, you know, or that bumper sticker says, I forget which one I saw it or heard it, that, you know, if the goddesses wanted us to vote, then they would give us candidates. Where are the candidates? You know, you cited Jill Stein and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. You know, these are honorable people, but they have no money. They can't compete. It's not a level playing field. You know, it's a David and Goliath kind of situation. And so I think it's foolhardy to place a lot of hope in particularly presidential elections. Even at this point, running for the Senate requires a huge amount of money. I think there's hardly a senator who is not an out-and-out millionaire in his or her own right now. So I don't know if Sanders and Warren are in that category, but they may be very close to it, having that kind of wealth. So that's why people were disappointed, I believe, in Obama, you know, coming after 8 years of arguably one of the most criminal administrations in the history of the United States. And when I say that, I mean, the bar is very high. But people were exhausted with the likes of Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith and Condi Rice and Colin Powell and George W. and all the rest. That, you know, here was an articulate, brilliant, well-educated a candidate who seemed fresh, who seemed, you know, who had tremendous command of English, you know, who knew how to use prepositions properly and even adverbs. And, you know, a lot of people were just exhausted from the Bush years, and I think Obama had a really good line, a very good, PR campaign. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Obama campaign won the 2008 kind of Best Advertising Award. I don't know what it's called, but I'm pretty certain that that's correct.
Yeah.
Because people on Madison Avenue were very impressed with, the change you can believe in and hope and on that entire packaging, that commodification of a particular message. So is the answer going to come from the top? No, it never has. Historically, there's really no precedence for that kind of thing happening from the top. It happens from the bottom. It happens from people's movements. We've seen that in the past. The Black Lives Matter movement right now, speaks to your very first question about police violence against African Americans. So I think we store too much energy and too much expectations in candidates who are, if they are elected, are institutionally restrained from carrying out literally any of their promises, any of their political promises. We have to look at the institutions of power in Washington, how they are staffed, how they are organized, what their aims are. And through these institutions, candidates come and go, but the institutions remain the same. The economic system remains basically intact. U.S. foreign policy, which is highly militarized, highly interventionist, has to be called imperialist, which garrisons the world with military bases. That is not changing.